Okay, so this week we're learning about the Dust Bowl. You learned about the Great Depression, and that was a time, remember, when the stock market crashed, people spent all their money to buy stock into companies that were doing really well during the Roaring 20s. Well, then some stuff happened. People got scared. They all tried to sell their stock at once, and it caused the stock market to crash. And when the stock market crashed, people lost all of their savings. They lost their savings, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs. It was a really, really rough time for about 10 years there after World War I, and then the beginning of World War II kind of ended the Great Depression. Okay, so during that time, there was another devastation that happened, or another blow that happened to the American people, and it was called the Dust Bowl. And when you are done with this today, you're going to have to go and record a flip grid. And on your flip grid, you're going to tell one, what is the Dust Bowl? Two, what caused the Dust Bowl? And three, when and how did the Dust Bowl end? Or what laws did the government put in place to keep this from happening again? Okay, so let's go on and we're going to find out more about the Dust Bowl. So what was it? Well, the Dust Bowl was the name given to a time in the 1930s where there was a combination of drought, high winds, and poor farming methods. This led to widespread devastation. There were lots of crops lost due to the topsoil being blown away. So a drought is when there's no rain, or there's very little rain, not enough to support what we need to keep our ground healthy. Okay, very, very high winds and the poor farming methods. Remember, during the Industrial Revolution, their tractors started being used to farm. People were very excited because they could plow more land and plant more crops. Well, they did so much of this that they plowed up so much of the land, and the soil was drying out very quickly because there was no rain. So they were digging up the wet soil or the moist soil from underneath the ground. It would dry out, and then they just kept doing this, and because there was no rain, it just ruined the soil. It eroded the soil. Okay, and think of this as like when you put flour on your cabinet. If you blow on it, it goes everywhere. So that's kind of what happened. And you can see right here that this farmer, this is all dirt right here in the background, and he's like pulling his head down. He's standing in the middle of his field because the dirt is blowing all in his eyes. Okay, the drought, it affected the states of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico the most. All right, so all of this yellow, there is a lot of soil erosion in this area where it's yellow. So Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota. But the hardest hit areas were right here in this pink. And if you look on your map, you can see like the panhandle of Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, quite a bit of Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico. So this pink area is the most affected area. Then we have the orange, which also had severe wind and dirt erosion. Okay, so those were the parts of the area that were the parts of the United States that were really, really affected. Also, later on, you're going to hear about a dirt storm that went all the way from Canada to Texas. Okay, and another dirt storm that went all the way from the affected area to Illinois, and it dropped 12 million pounds of dirt. Okay, so here is a blowing dirt storm in Elkhart, Kansas on May 21st, 1937. This right here in the back is all dirt. Imagine that coming towards you. Okay, and you know, it's everything back here is just being covered in dirt. Okay, there was a black blizzards is what they were called. On April 14th, 1935, there was a black blizzard that went from Canada to Texas. The dirt storm could limit visibility for just a few feet. People could not see to drive. The dirt would fill their eyes, noses, and lungs. So on April 14th, 1935, the dirt storm was so bad that it was nicknamed Black Sunday. And like I said a while ago, the dirt was carried from Canada all the way to Texas. Look how far it traveled. Okay, and there was no visibility. The dirt was so thick that you could only see like a couple of feet in front of you. And there's another picture. Those are not clouds, that is dirt. Okay. Beginning on May 9th, 1934, a strong 2-day dust storm removed topsoil in one of the worst storms of the Dust Bowl. That means that for 2 days, the wind blew so hard that it picked up so much topsoil that it just, for 2 days, you could not see anything. It was just completely black outside. It blocked the sun completely. Okay. The dust clouds blew all the way from Chicago, where they deposited 12 million pounds of dust. Now, remember when I showed you that Illinois there? That was part of that. Okay, Chicago's in Illinois. So it deposited, or it dumped, 12 million pounds of dirt in Chicago. 2 days later, the same storm reached cities in the east, so it just kept on going. Also, in that winter, red snow fell in the New England states due to all the dirt still in the atmosphere. So not all the dirt was like just dropped from the sky. Some of it remained, and when it snowed that winter, the snow was actually red because of all the dirt in the atmosphere. And I'll show y'all a picture of that in a few minutes. Here's another dirt storm approaching Spearman, Texas. After the storms died down, the people had to literally dig themselves out. Here is a man digging his fence line. Now think about how tall you are. People's fences were kind of tall. Yes, Dana?
I couldn't see the screen, but now I can.
Okay. So people, think about their fences. They had to keep cows and horses and livestock in. So their fences were probably about as tall as you are now. Imagine having to dig yourself out of this dirt storm. Okay, so people would have to dig themselves out, but the added challenge there was that their cars and their tractors were buried. So everything that they would have used to help them get the dirt out was completely buried. Okay, I think I probably would have sat down right here and just sat down right here and cried. I mean, their houses are underground, under the dirt. Their cars are completely under the dirt. Their tractors are completely under the dirt. So they had to dig themselves out with their hands or shovels. And then comes the problem of where in the world are we going to put all this dirt? It's not like snow. It's not going to melt and go away. So they had to figure out first how to dig themselves out, and second, what am I going to do with all this dirt? Okay. Here's another picture of their homes being buried. Okay. So one of the main crops was wheat. The wheat stalks were broken off with the wind and blowing dirt. The roots were blown out of the ground. So there was nothing, the ground was so dry that the wheat stalks were just barely hanging on. And so when the wind blew, all the wheat just blew away with it. The cows and the horses and all their livestock, they were dying because when they tried to eat their grass, it was just so full of dirt that they were just filling their stomachs up with mud. Okay, so they had some problems there too because their livestock was dying because they were just eating mud. By 1934, the Yearbook of Agriculture announced that 100 million acres have lost all or most of their topsoil. So that top layer of soil was gone. Another 125 million acres were about to, and 35 million acres could not grow crops of any kind. The soil was so messed up that it was just useless. Okay, I see some friends who are sleeping, which is probably not what we should be doing. So I need you to put your heads up, because as I'm scrolling through, I see some heads down on pillows and asleep. What little crops did survive, the jackrabbits and the grasshoppers would attack and eat. So the grasshoppers and then rabbits, they eat the grass. Well, they had to eat. So if they could find the grass, they would eat it. And what little crops there were, the people needed. So what they used to do, and this is horrible, they used to have what are called rabbit drives. And they would herd or gather all the rabbits into a fenced-in area and then kill them with bats and skillets. So they'd go out there and just hit them until they died. But they would eat the rabbits after they killed them and stuff, but they had to save their crops. So they would have jackrabbit drives and get rid of the rabbits so that they could keep their crops. Okay. Why did this happen? You need to pay attention to this because you are going to have to talk about this in your Flipgrid. Many new farmers headed west with the Homestead Act. Then, with the invention of the tractor, the combine, etc., farming was on the rise. Remember, we talked about that in the beginning. How so many farmers were like farming more land because they had their tractors and they could cover more land and plant more crops. Well, they did this so quickly and so much that they ruined the soil. The topsoil was turned under for planting, and there were no trees for windbreaks, and also crop rotation was not used. Now, my dad is a farmer, and he used to have a pretty nice farm. And what he would do, or what the farmers had to do, was they would have to rotate their crops. So they would plant one, they now had to rotate their crops. And they weren't doing this in the past. They would plant one crop for 2 years, and then they'd switch and plant something else, like wheat one year, cotton the next, soybeans. Wheat, cotton, soybeans. So that they could restore the nutrients in the soil. Okay? And also, they didn't have trees up to block the wind, so the wind would just hit the soil at full force. So those were part of the problems because they weren't planting trees because they were worried about growing their crops. What little crops they did, oh, whoops, sorry, I read that part, I'm sorry. This is a picture of a farmer and his sons making their way through the dust storm in Oklahoma. The black blizzards struck so suddenly that many farmers became lost in their own fields and suffocated. Some of them were only yards away from their shelter that they could not see. So there was so much wind and dirt that they couldn't see where they were going. And a lot of them suffocated very, very close to where they needed to be, but they couldn't see it because of the thick dirt in the air. Here are the homes. Some of the other effects of the Dust Bowl were car engines got clogged. It was sucking in the dirt, and it was killing the engines. Here, my grandmother, I remember her telling us about this because she was a child during the Dust Bowl. The families would put wet towels up over their windows and their doorways or wet their curtains down to kind of get some of the dirt, to absorb some of the dirt or get the dirt to stick to them. But it really didn't help a lot. They had just, their houses were full of dirt because the windows were not as good as they are today. Hospitals began to fill with people with dust pneumonia or the brown plague. The dirt filled their lungs. So here are some people wearing these masks to keep the dirt out. You can tell by this woman's face how rough it was. People depended on their crops for money. No crops meant no money. Food was very scarce, and so was money. So on top of the depression and losing our jobs and having no money, now our crops were gone. Another thing that would happen was dust storms crackled with powerful static electricity. How many of you have gone to the store and you've been walking through and then you touch like the freezer door and it kind of shocks you a little bit? Have y'all ever experienced that? Okay, some people are raising their hands. It like shocks you. Or you're walking across the house and you touch somebody and it shocks them. That's static electricity, okay? And there was so much static electricity built up between the ground and the dust in the air that it would shoot blue flames out, okay? And the flames would jump from barbed wire fences, and friends would be shaking hands, and they would shock each other so bad that it would knock them backwards onto the ground. And since there was static electricity, it would short out your car engines. It could also cause fires. I mean, think about this, a blue flame near your car that's full of gas. That's not good. So people, in order to stop these things from happening, would put chains on the back of their cars, and it would ground it out and cause this to not happen. Okay? It got so bad that thousands of people had to leave their homes, and when they left their homes, they moved to California because it rains more there. And these people were actually called Okies because most of them came from Oklahoma. So they migrated or moved to California. So about 25% of the population left in the affected states by 1940. 2.5 million people had moved out of the Plains states. So 2.5 million people left Oklahoma, Texas, all of these places, and actually moved to the Plains states or to California to get away from this because they had nothing to stay there for. Now, we all know that the Great Depression, if you listened to your lesson the other day, the Great Depression ended with the start of World War II because with World War II, they needed people to work in the factories to help them to get their supplies for war. So it gave more jobs. Also, President Roosevelt, he signed into law the New Deal. And what the New Deal did was it got everything back on track, and there were laws that he put into place. It also finally started raining, which was good because the crops could grow. Part of this, the Soil Conservation Act, was that trees were planted to serve as windbreaks. They also planted native grasses, and they were not allowed to till up the native grasses. Native grasses are grass that it grows well where the area is. So if you're living in a desert place, then the grass can survive well without a lot of rain. Okay? Farmers also started to rotate their crops. So these are 3 ways that we prevent this from happening again. We plant trees, we plant native grasses, and we rotate our crops. Remember that because you're going to have to talk about it in your flip grid. Okay? The Soil Conservation Act of 1935 was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on April 27, 1935. This law gave farmers money to plant native grasses, trees, and certain vegetables to protect the soil. So the farmers didn't have a lot of money, but we have to fix this. So the government is like, let's give them money. Let's give our farmers money so that they can afford to do this, so that this doesn't happen again. Okay, and here's another picture. And next year, because the book is actually in my classroom, and we can't get to our classrooms right now, this book is called Out of the Dust, and it is about children during the Dust Bowl, okay, which was a very scary and serious time. So, whenever we get done today, I'm going to strongly suggest that you go to your Flipgrid and record your information about the Dust Bowl. It is a grade, okay? Also, you had an assignment on Monday that was due about the Great Depression, so you need to watch that and listen to it. I know a lot of you have done it, but some of you have not. All right? So let's make sure we get that done today. Deal? Okay.